Somewhere tonight, a woman is waiting at a table, wearing her best smile, holding her breath, hoping love shows up. But what if the person who stood her up did her the biggest favor of all? Now, before we begin this story, I want to say something from the heart. If you believe no woman should ever be embarrassed for trusting too soon, if you believe family isn't always who we're born to, but who shows up when it matters, comment, "I'm with you, Mr. Hearthline," and tap the subscribe button, so more people can feel seen, heard, and healed through stories like this. Because sometimes, heartbreak doesn't break you, it guides you right to where you were meant to be. Vero's Bistro wasn't where hope usually went to die. But tonight, tucked in the corner of its velvet-lit elegance, it came close. Sarah Wynne clutched her phone like it might ring her into existence. Her sundress, sunflower yellow with a frayed hem, felt like a costume, the kind you wear to pretend you belong. Her shoes clicked softly across the marble floor when the hostess led her in, but the sound died too quickly, like her confidence. "Reservation?" the woman asked, not unkindly. "Sarah Wynne," she replied, adding a practiced smile to sound like someone used to saying her name in places like this. She was shown to a table with 2 wine glasses, folded napkins like origami, and a single white lily in a long-stemmed vase. Everything looked expensive but subtle, like the restaurant wanted you to know you were rich without reminding you too loudly. She sat with her back straight, knees crossed at the ankle, hands in her lap. Her eyes flicked between the room and her phone. 7:05. He was 5 minutes late. No big deal. She turned her screen face down and then up again. Checked the app. Checked the message history. He had confirmed the date. Called her sweet. Said he'd be wearing blue. She smoothed her dress, adjusted her hair, sipped water, looked toward the entrance each time the door chimed. At 7:15, her confidence took a hit. At 7:20, her jaw tightened. By 7:25, the jazz music started sounding cruel. Across the room, from a booth bathed in shadows, a man stirred his drink once, then twice. He had seen it happen before. Not the exact scene, but the quiet unraveling of a person who'd tried to believe too hard, who had dared to hope, just once, that they mattered enough for someone else's time. Knox Rylan had mastered detachment. On most nights, he sat alone in expensive places so he wouldn't have to explain his silence. He wasn't hiding, he was surviving. After all, being a single dad in the corporate world made small talk feel like climbing stairs in wet shoes. But something about her caught him. She wasn't loud. She didn't fidget to demand attention. She didn't pull out a book or pretend to text. She just sat there, like she was doing her best not to shrink. At 7:30, her phone lit up. She blinked down at it. A message. From the guy. "You actually showed? Damn, I was joking. You're not even close to my type. No way I'm wasting my night on this." She didn't gasp, didn't run. Instead, she set the phone down gently. Her fingers shook, just once, before she grabbed her water and took a slow sip. Her face was motionless, but her chest rose and fell like she was swallowing something sharp. That's what made Knox sit up. There was no public meltdown, no dramatic exit, just a woman processing rejection with a kind of dignity most people couldn't fake if they tried. He watched her force herself upright, like folding would have been easier, but pride had a straighter spine. He signaled the waiter, slipped him a card and a folded napkin with a short note. Said nothing more. From her table, Sarah noticed the server approach. He wore confidence like a tailored suit, but his tone was gentle. "Miss Wynne?" he asked softly. She blinked. "Yes. This dish is for you on the house. I didn't order anything." He smiled. "It was requested. With respect." Her lips parted. "By who?" Before the answer could come, a low voice behind her interrupted. "It's not charity. You looked like someone who needed something warm." She turned and froze. He wasn't a boy trying to flirt. He wasn't some hero swooping in. He stood calm, grounded, hair slightly tousled but neat, a navy blazer open over a soft charcoal shirt. His presence didn't announce itself, settled in. His voice had the weight of a man who had known long silences, and used them. Sarah's instinct kicked in. "I'm sorry, but I don't." He raised his hand lightly. "I'll leave. Just figured you could use a reason to stay a few more minutes. That's all." There was no pressure, no smirk. He wasn't angling for attention. She looked at the dish, perfectly plated. The scent of lemongrass and garlic wafted up, then back at him. His eyes weren't searching her. They were waiting patiently, like whatever answer she gave would be respected. She swallowed, unsure of her voice. "Sit." He did, and for the first time that night she exhaled. The first bite nearly undid her. Lemongrass and ginger, followed by something creamy, with a hint of heat that arrived just late. Enough to surprise her tongue. Sarah had taken the fork hesitantly, like accepting the plate might say too much about her. But now, seated across from a man she didn't know, she had no appetite for pride. Just quiet. He didn't speak at first, didn't offer a name or a story, just sipped his whiskey, elbows on the table, gaze steady but not invasive. "I don't usually accept food from strangers," she said finally, voice soft. "Then we'll make it easier," he replied. "Just think of me as the guy who didn't want to watch you walk out empty." She raised a brow. "And why would that bother you?" His shoulders moved in a half shrug. "Because it costs nothing to be kind. But too many people act like it bankrupts them." That got a blink out of her. Not a smile, but the smallest twitch near the corner of her mouth, something reluctant, something earned. "What's your name?" she asked. He considered for half a second. "Knox." She looked down. "Like the old fort?" "No relation. But I do keep things locked up." Sarah's fingers wrapped around the stem of her glass. "You rehearsed that line." He chuckled, low and brief. "Not really. Just said it out loud for the first time." She nodded slowly. "So, what's your story, Knox?" "I'd rather hear yours," he said. "I'm not a good storyteller." He leaned forward, forearms on the table, gaze level. "You showed up for a date. You waited. You didn't cry when he humiliated you. You sat tall. That already tells me something." A flush crept up her neck. She wasn't used to being read like that, without judgment, without pity. "I waited because I thought I'd earned this. A nice place. Clean date. Someone who didn't ask me to send extra pictures." "Clean date," he repeated. "Interesting term." She shrugged. "You'd be surprised what passes for normal in dating these days." "I wouldn't," Knox said. "But I'm not really in that world anymore." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Married?" He shook his head. "Widowed. For years." Sarah's expression sobered. "I'm sorry. You don't have to be," he replied. "It's part of the story, not the whole thing." The table went quiet. Jazz floated over them like background seasoning, barely there, but enough to soften the silence. Knox didn't fill the space with compliments or small talk. He watched her eat, not to monitor but to offer quiet company. He poured her more water when her glass emptied. She noticed. He didn't ask what she did, didn't compliment her dress, didn't make her feel like she had to perform, and that oddly made her want to speak. "I almost didn't come," she said. "The guy, Terry, he messaged last minute, said he'd made a reservation here. I thought, if I said no, I'd regret it." "You regret it now?" She paused. "No, not because of him. Just, I'm tired of trying to belong somewhere I clearly don't." Knox didn't flinch. "Belonging's not something you earn. It's something someone offers freely." Sarah stared at him. "That's not a line?" He shook his head. "It's what I tell my daughter when she asks why kids don't talk to her at daycare." Her heart pinched at that. "How old is she?" 4. "Her name's Lenny." Sarah smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. "She's lucky. You speak like a man who loves on purpose." Knox lowered his gaze for a second. I try. That doesn't always mean I get it right. Sarah set her fork down. No one does. For a moment they sat still, not searching for more, just accepting that maybe tonight didn't need to end in answers. Knox reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded linen card. He slid it across the table. 2 words were written in ink that looked handwritten. Next time. No number. No name. Just an invitation without pressure. Sarah looked up. You're just gonna leave? He nodded. You don't need rescuing. You needed company. Now you've had both. She didn't know how to respond to that. And maybe that was the point. Knox stood, pulled on his coat with a calm grace, slid his wallet back into his pocket, then offered her a nod, not of goodbye, but respect. As he turned to leave, she called after him softly. Knox! He paused but didn't look back. Thank you for seeing me, he responded without turning. You were hard to miss. And then he was gone. Not chasing. Not lingering. Just gone. Sarah looked down at the linen card again. And for the first time that night, her throat didn't feel like glass. Sarah sat in the same spot, but everything had shifted. The lily in the vase no longer looked like a cheap attempt at elegance. The table no longer felt like a stage she'd been left standing on. Even the weight of her dress seemed lighter, though. The dress hadn't changed. He hadn't flirted. He hadn't pried. He hadn't even lingered long enough to be memorable in any typical sense. And yet, she couldn't stop replaying the sound of his voice when he said, You were hard to miss. It wasn't what he said. It was how he meant it. No agenda. No pickup game. Just presence. The waiter passed by to clear the other place setting. He hesitated, sensing the energy around. Her had changed. She offered a faint smile and a nod. He moved silently, respectfully. The rest of the restaurant carried on. Glasses clinked. Cutlery moved in rhythm. Across the room, a couple laughed at something private. But the sharp edge Sarah had felt just 30 minutes earlier, the sensation of being the only person in a world designed to remind her she didn't belong was dull now. Not gone, but bearable. She sipped the water he'd poured for her. She wasn't even sure when he had done it. The napkin lay in her lap still folded. She hadn't touched the bread, but she had nearly finished the plate of food. It was the first real meal she'd had in 2 days. She hadn't noticed that either. There was something gently sobering about being seen by someone who didn't ask anything in return. It disrupted her usual defenses. The kind she built when people mistook her kindness for naivety. The kind she carried when walking into rooms where dresses like hers were considered charming in the patronizing sense. She leaned back slightly and let out a slow, quiet breath. He hadn't left a business card. He hadn't asked for hers. There was no subtle invitation to connect online. Just those 2 words on a thick card she now slid into her purse. Next time. No contact information. But also no pressure. It was the kind of gesture that didn't beg to be followed. It simply waited. She touched her lips briefly, not because they'd been kissed. They hadn't. But because they had softened from something else. Recognition. A woman in a red cocktail dress passed by her table, looking down briefly before offering a tight-lipped smile. Sarah nodded politely. The old version of herself, the one from just an hour ago, might have shrunk a little at the comparison. Not tonight. Tonight, she stayed still. Tonight, she finished her water. When the server returned with the check, he looked confused. There's no charge, miss. The gentleman covered everything. Sarah blinked. Of course he did. But she said it more to herself than to him. She reached into her purse, pulled out a folded 5, and slid it into the check sleeve anyway. Tip, or thanks or habit. She didn't even know. As she stood to leave, she took one last glance at the table. A quiet scene. A nearly clean plate. No number. No lipstick stain on the glass. Just a night that didn't end in disaster. A night that paused. She walked toward the door slowly, not dragging her feet, not hurrying either. The hostess gave her a parting glance, slightly puzzled. Sarah walked past with calm dignity. Outside, the night air met her bare shoulders like a question. She didn't have the answer yet, but she no longer felt like the punchline. She stood for a second on the sidewalk, unsure whether to call a ride or just walk for a while. The sidewalks glowed under the lamps. Her phone buzzed once. Not him, not the date, just a spam notification. She silenced it, then pulled her purse closer to her side, and smiled. The bell above the door jingled as Sarah stepped inside. No one noticed her entrance. Not that she expected a parade, but she'd hoped for at least a smile from the barista. Still, the smell of roasted beans and baked cinnamon gave the room its own sort of embrace. It had been 5 days since the restaurant. She wasn't counting. She just remembered, like you remember the color of a scarf that made you feel a little braver. She stepped forward in line, tucking her hair behind one ear and glancing at the menu like she hadn't memorized it 2 visits ago. The morning crowd was sparse, just enough to feel alive, not enough to feel crowded. When it was her turn, she spoke softly. Medium oat milk latte, 1 pump of vanilla. The barista nodded. Name? Sarah. She stepped to the pickup counter, sliding her phone from her bag to check her calendar. 2 interviews. 1 she was late for, another she'd probably cancel. Motivation didn't come easily. When you'd poured your last hope into a night that ended with no follow-up. The coffee machine hissed. A newspaper rustled in the corner. And then, oat milk again? I guessed right. Sarah turned, startled. He was seated in the corner booth, just out of view. White shirt rolled to the elbows, collar open. A tablet rested on the table in front of him, but it was clear he hadn't touched it in a while. Knox. His voice hadn't changed. Neither had the stillness he carried. Like his presence took up space but didn't demand it. You remembered my drink order? She asked, stepping cautiously toward the edge of the booth. He gave a faint shrug. I remember things that matter. Sarah raised an eyebrow. We spoke for less than an hour. And you think that makes people less memorable? She paused, not sure if it was a compliment or a challenge. Maybe I just make an impression, she said coolly. Knox smiled with the corner of his mouth. That you do. She looked toward the door, then back at him. You come here often? He gestured at the tablet. It's my office away from silence, and the only place Lenny hasn't learned how to FaceTime me by accident. Sarah's lips twitched. Smart girl. Too smart. The barista called her name. She turned, retrieved the drink, then returned to his booth and hovered, unsure whether to walk away or sit. Knox leaned back. No pressure. She took the seat across from him. The table between them was small. Her knees brushed against the edge. He folded his tablet closed. You're not reading? Not anymore. They sipped their drinks in a silence that wasn't awkward, just unhurried. Sarah finally asked, Did you expect to see me again? No. But you're not surprised. Knox looked her in the eye. I told you next time. Her fingers curled around the cup. You didn't leave your number. Because if you needed it, you would have asked. She studied him for a long moment. That's not how men usually work. I'm not usually most men. His calm wasn't arrogance. It was centeredness. Like he'd made peace with not needing to chase what didn't want to be caught. Sarah leaned forward slightly. So what now? You remember my coffee order and stare until I agree to dinner. He chuckled. I'm not here to earn anything. I'm just here. That sounds suspiciously like a line. It's a boundary. She blinked. Okay. That's new. Knox tilted his head. Let me guess. Your last date tried to get you drunk and then, accidentally, forgot his wallet. No, she said, smirking. He actually ghosted me mid-meal before he could even pretend to be interested. Knox shook his head slowly. Then I'm glad I interrupted. She looked at him, puzzled. Why? Because I think people deserve to leave places with their dignity intact. The words landed heavier than he probably meant them to. Sarah looked down at her cup. Steam curled between her fingers. A moment passed before she said, Why do you talk like that? He raised a brow. Like what? Like someone who actually thinks before speaking. Knox didn't smile. Because I've seen what words can undo when you don't. And that was all he said. No follow-up. No story. No explanation. She didn't press. Instead, she drank the last of her latte, her gaze never leaving his. And for the first time in days, the world didn't feel as loud. The air between them had the comfort of something unspoken. Sarah tapped her fingernail against the coffee cup, the faint click louder than she expected. Knox didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did and just didn't mind the sound of small fidgets. She watched him as he leaned back in his seat. His posture wasn't performative. He looked like someone who didn't have anything to prove. So, she said, testing the silence. Do you always make women second-guess whether they're on a date or a TED Talk? Knox didn't react immediately. He let the question linger. I didn't ask you on a date, he replied calmly. She sipped her drink. Could have fooled me. I offered conversation, he said. You're the one who sat down. Sarah tilted her head. So if I stood up right now and walked out, you wouldn't chase me? No. She raised an eyebrow. But I'd remember, he added. And I'd still pay for your coffee next time. That shut her up. Not because it was clever, but because it was honest. It wasn't loaded. It didn't beg for a response. It just was. She looked out the window, the corner of her mouth twitching. What is it with you and showing up exactly when people least expect it? I don't think people notice the quiet moments, he said. So I try to. You sound like someone who used to be loud. Knox didn't smile. Maybe. A long time ago. She didn't push. But the door he didn't fully open tempted her. I'm not used to that, she admitted. What? Men who let me sit in silence without assuming something's wrong. He nodded once. Then maybe you've been around men who don't listen. Sarah swallowed. He leaned forward slightly, setting his cup down. You hungry? The question caught her off guard. It wasn't phrased like a proposal, more like a check-in. She hesitated. Depends. Are you trying to impress me now? No, Knox replied. I'd rather you eat than overthink. Her mouth parted slightly in surprise. She studied his face. He didn't break eye contact. There was no smirk, no charming twinkle, just steadiness. I know a place, he added. It's quiet. And I promise the food's better than the cafes. Sarah glanced at her phone. She had a virtual meeting in 2 hours she didn't want to attend, and a scheduled nap she probably wouldn't enjoy anyway. I should say no, she murmured. But you don't want to. No, she said, standing slowly. I don't. He didn't beam. He didn't offer his arm. He simply rose, tucked his tablet under his arm, and held the door open for her as they stepped outside. No fanfare. No theatrics. Just rhythm. The city was warm without being punishing. The kind of day where people walked a little slower, not because they were lazy but because it felt like time could be borrowed. Knox pressed the button at the crosswalk. Sarah noticed the small tattoo on the inside of his wrist, barely visible. What's that? She asked. He looked down. My daughter's initials. Lenny, right? He nodded. She has you wrapped. She's my reason. Sarah thought about asking what happened to Lenny's mother, but something in his tone warned her off. He wasn't hiding pain. He was honoring silence. They turned a corner, walking without talking, until she said, You're not what I expected. I usually get that. I mean, you're polite, but you don't flatter. Do you want flattery? No, she said, but I'm not used to being this seen. Knox gave her a glance. You're not invisible, Sarah. That landed harder than she expected. She blinked ahead, heart thudding for no reason. And you didn't ask for my number last time, she said. I didn't want it unless you offered. Why? Because chasing someone to prove you're worth their attention usually ends in resentment. Or exhaustion. She turned to him, genuinely stunned. You talk like a therapist. No, Knox said. But I've been to one. She smiled without meaning to. He noticed, but didn't comment. They walked the final block in silence. Not because they had run out of things to say, but because neither of them needed to fill the space anymore. The car ride was quiet. Not the kind of silence that stretches awkwardly, but the kind that lets thoughts settle. Sarah watched the city peel away behind the windshield. Knox didn't fill the drive with music. No small talk, no attempt to impress. Just one hand on the wheel and a quiet awareness of her presence beside him. When they pulled into the driveway, her eyes swept over the house. It wasn't a mansion, but it wasn't modest either. 2 stories, modern structure, painted a soft slate gray. Ivy crawled along the side, not overgrown, just lived in. She followed him up the steps. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, then turned slightly. "You're welcome to come in. No pressure if you'd rather not." Sarah hesitated for only a second, then stepped through. What greeted her wasn't what she'd expected. The floors were warm-toned hardwood. The lighting was soft, not staged. A faint scent of lavender mixed with something savory lingered in the air. She took in the space. Books lined one wall in varying sizes, some stacked sideways. A row of children's picture books sat neatly under a small bench, each cover well-loved. The dining table had crayon marks on the edge. On the fridge was a photo. A little girl in pink overalls, hair in tiny pigtails. Eyes wide, smiling without effort. Sarah moved toward it. "She's beautiful," she said. Knox set his keys in a dish by the door. "Lenny, she's with my mother today. They're probably baking something I'll regret eating too much of." Sarah glanced at the drawing taped below the photo. A stick figure family. One large figure, one small, holding hands. Big hearts floating above their heads. "She looks safe." "She is," Knox said quietly. "I guard her heart like my own." Sarah turned. "And yours?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the kitchen. Open concept. A pot of something simmered on the stove. "Hungry, remember?" he said over his shoulder. "I thought you were taking me to a restaurant." "I changed my mind." She folded her arms loosely. "You cook." "Most days. Lenny's picky, but she trusts my pasta." He pulled open a drawer, grabbed 2 plates, and nodded toward the stools at the kitchen. "Island." She sat. He moved with quiet rhythm, spooning food, handing her a fork, pouring water with lemon. "Wedges." Sarah took a bite, paused. "You weren't kidding." He looked pleased but not proud, just relieved she liked it. "What is this?" "Shrimp linguine. Garlic, lemon, olive oil." Lenny picks out the shrimp, says they look like pink commas. Sarah laughed softly. "She's funny. She's everything." They ate for a moment in quiet. Then Sarah's gaze drifted again to the family photos near the hallway. No wedding pictures, but one framed snapshot, Knox younger beside a woman with a scarf tied around her head. Her smile was tired, but warm. Sarah nodded toward it. "Her?" He followed her gaze. "Yes." "How long?" He didn't blink. 3.5 years. Sarah let the silence settle before speaking. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said. "Some love isn't meant to last forever. Just long enough to give us someone to protect." The sentence held more weight than it revealed. Sarah chewed slowly, swallowed, then shifted on the stool. "Do you always bring women here?" Knox looked up, his face still. "No, because it feels like I walked into something private." He nodded. "You did." Sarah set her fork down. "Then why me?" He didn't hesitate. "Because you looked like someone who wouldn't fake her way through it." She held his gaze. "That's supposed to be a compliment?" "No, just a fact." The tension between them wasn't charged. It was still, like 2 people seeing one another without blinking. Knox stood and walked to the record player in the corner, placed the needle gently, jazz-filled. The room soft, distant. The kind of music that didn't ask for attention but rewarded it if you listened. He returned and leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Do you want wine?" Sarah shook her head. "Not yet." He poured himself a glass but didn't drink. Just let the glass sit in his hand like a placeholder. Sarah finally said, "You're guarded. So are you. But I'm trying not to be." Knox tilted his head. "Why?" She exhaled. "Because for some reason, I don't feel like I have to be here." His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes softened. "Then don't," he said. "Just that." She looked around the room once more. No armor, no script, just a house full of real things, and a man who seemed to mean every word without trying to impress her. The pasta was gone. The plates sat rinsed in the sink. The jazz played on a little slower now, a little deeper in tone. Sarah remained perched on the stool, her feet tucked under her, one hand wrapped around a glass of water. Knox stood across from her, leaning against the counter like the conversation was enough of a meal. "You live in quiet," she said after a moment. He nodded once. "Loud never gave me anything I didn't regret." Sarah tilted her head. "That sounds like history." "It is. You always talk like this?" "Only when someone's actually listening." She smiled. Small. Honest. Her hand drifted to the edge of the marble counter, fingers tracing the cold surface. Knox noticed but said nothing. The silence stretched. Not awkward, not empty. Just honest. And then it happened. She reached, just a few inches across the counter, fingertips brushing the inside of his wrist. He didn't pull away, didn't lean in either. He froze, not out of fear or uncertainty but focus. Like every inch of skin where her touch landed had become a live wire, and he didn't want to ruin the moment by moving too quickly. Sarah looked at him, steady. Her hand remained light, not grasping, not demanding, just curious. "I don't pity you," she whispered. "I know. I'm not looking to fix you. I wouldn't let you." Her thumb traced the faint line of his wrist bone. His eyes never left hers. "I don't want to impress you," he said. "You already have." It wasn't a flirtation. It was a revelation. Something unsaid settled between them, like the air changed pressure without warning. Then slowly Knox reached up. Not for her hand. For her face. He didn't cup it. Didn't grab her. He just let his knuckles brush the side of her jaw, the way you might touch something sacred, when you're not sure you're allowed. She didn't flinch. Her breath caught, but she didn't flinch. Their faces were close now. Closer than strangers. Closer than friends. Still inches between them. But it didn't feel like distance. Felt like a pause with purpose. Knox's voice dropped. Not for effect. For intimacy. "I want to know how to touch you right." Her eyes flickered, not in confusion but in realization. She didn't smile. She didn't blush. She simply whispered, "Then take your time." And that was all the invitation he needed. But still, he didn't rush. He didn't press forward like a man with permission to conquer. He leaned in like a man asking with his presence. Their foreheads touched first. Then the tip of his nose brushed hers. Then his mouth found hers, soft, closed, reverent. It was a kiss that didn't search for climax. It searched for certainty. Sarah's hand left his wrist and slid up his forearm. He responded by stepping closer, the counter now the only barrier. Their hips weren't touching yet, but they would be. The kiss deepened gently, gradually, like they were both making sure the other could still breathe. When he finally let his hand move to the small of her back, her body answered. Not by pulling away, not by stiffening, but by settling into him. Their rhythm wasn't wild. It was measured. He kissed her like a man who had waited years to feel something real, and now refused to mishandle it. Her hands slid up to his shoulders, testing their breadth, their steadiness. Knox broke the kiss first, but only by a breath. "Tell me when to stop," he said. Sarah looked at him with something deeper than agreement. "Tell me when you're ready," she replied. They stayed in that stillness, foreheads pressed, breaths sinking. It wasn't lust that hovered. It was consent. And it was beautiful. Knox stepped away, not because he wanted distance, but because he needed space to honor the moment. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a demand. It was a promise. Sarah followed him down the short hallway. The walls held soft lighting and a framed drawing crayon lines of a house with a big front door. Lenny's name scrawled in wobbly letters. He opened a door on the left. His bedroom surprised her. Not the size, not the layout, but the absence of ego. No mirrors on the ceiling. No designer displays. No masculine aesthetic begging to be noticed. Just dark navy sheets, a wooden nightstand, a lamp with a warm hue, a photo of Lenny near the bed, a folded blanket at the edge. He stepped aside to let her in. She didn't speak. She walked in quietly, slowly, like she was entering something sacred. Knox didn't rush her. He watched, not with hunger, but with reverence. She reached for the hem of her dress, paused, then looked at him. "I'm not dressed to impress," she said quietly. He stepped forward. "You don't have to be." Her fingers slid the straps from her shoulders. The fabric fell like a soft sigh. She stood in her underwear, plain black, nothing expensive. Still, she looked like power wrapped in grace. Knox didn't touch her yet. He reached down and unbuttoned his shirt, slowly, not to tease, to show. Beneath the shirt were scars, thin lines across his side, a deeper one across his shoulder. Signs of surgeries, maybe accidents, maybe history. He didn't cover them. Sarah's eyes followed them, not in fear, but in respect. She reached out, placing her palm flat against his chest. His heartbeat responded. Steady, heavy, real. He leaned forward again, his hands sliding along her waist, his lips brushing the edge of her jaw. She tipped her head, not to offer, but to receive. Their mouths met again, this time with purpose. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her fingers threading into the back of his hair. He kissed her slower than before, but deeper, like this wasn't about taking, but about being. Allowed in, Knox backed toward the bed, pulling her with him. They landed gently, bodies flush, breaths thick. His hands roamed, but not hungrily. He learned her curves like a language, touching to understand, not to conquer. She arched as his mouth moved along her collarbone. Not moaning, just breathing faster, fingers curling. When he reached behind her to unhook her bra, he paused. Her eyes met his. She nodded once. It dropped between them. He took her in without commentary, without reaction, just recognition. Then, gently, his hand slid down her thigh, taking the last layer of fabric with it. She didn't hide, and he didn't stare. He pulled back the sheets and guided her in, then followed. Under the covers, they pressed together. Warm skin, slow hearts, open eyes. Knox cupped her cheek. "You still sure?" he whispered. Sarah touched his jaw. "I've never been more." When he entered her, it wasn't urgent. It wasn't frantic. It was a question answered. Her body welcomed him without resistance, without hesitation. They moved in rhythm, slow at first, then deeper. Not rough, not messy, just known. Her back arched as her hands clutched his shoulder blades. Her breath caught in soft whimpers. He kissed the corner of her mouth, her neck, her temple. Every place he touched, he anchored. When her body tightened around him, her voice cracked as she whispered his name. He slowed, held her, let her shake, then kissed her again, softer this time. He didn't rush to finish. He waited, matched her, followed her breath until both of them let go. And when it was over, they didn't pull apart. They didn't collapse. They stayed wrapped, breathing in sync. No jokes, no expectations, just presence. The room had settled. Sheets tangled around their legs. Warmth hovered in the air, but not from the heater. It was the kind that came from skin against skin. Soft breaths, slower heartbeats, no clock ticking in the background. Sarah lay on her side, one arm beneath her head, the other resting lightly on Knox's chest. She wasn't asleep, but she wasn't searching for words either. Knox stared at the ceiling, not distant, just quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't demand explanation. Sarah shifted, her cheek brushing his shoulder. "You okay?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yeah, Another beat passed. I don't usually, she started. He cut in gently. Me neither, she exhaled. Not from tension but from being understood. The lamp still glowed dim in the corner. The record player had long since stopped spinning. But the warmth of jazz still felt like it lingered in the walls. I thought I'd feel awkward, she said. Do you? She shook her head. No. And that's what's weird. Knox turned his head toward her. We didn't do anything we didn't both want. That's the part I'm not used to, she admitted. His eyes didn't leave hers. That should be the bare minimum. Sarah let those words sit. She wanted to believe them. Maybe tonight she did. She sat up slightly, the blanket slipping to her waist. She pulled it back up and looked around. The room again. Then she spotted it. The tiny sock, purple with white polka dots, tucked near the edge of the dresser. Left behind, probably by a 4-year-old with no sense of placement. Sarah smiled. She leaves trails. Knox followed her gaze. She thinks my room is boring. Says I need more colors. Sarah laughed under her breath. She's not wrong. He chuckled once. I told her that's why I keep her around. Sarah traced a line across his collarbone. Tell me about her. He blinked slowly, then let out a breath through his nose. She hates naps, loves pancakes, can tie her shoes on some days but refuses on others. Because Daddy does it better. She makes up songs. And she calls me Captain Dada when she's trying to make me laugh. Sarah leaned her head on his chest again. You sound like a man who remembers every second. I do. There was no melancholy in his voice, just memory. And her mom? She asked gently. Knox stared at the ceiling again. Kind, brave, tired all the time. The day Lenny was born. She whispered, keep her soft. That's all she said. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Sarah's eyes welled, but she didn't speak. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. They stayed like that for a long stretch of stillness. No rushing. No tossing out fantasies about the future. Just being. After a while, Sarah whispered, so, what happens now? Knox turned toward her again, propping himself slightly on one elbow. I walk you to the door in the morning. You leave with all your dignity intact. And if you ever want to come back, you knock. No promises? No pressure. Her lips curled. I think I prefer that. Me too. She laid back down beside him, closer this time. And in the silence that followed, they didn't define anything. They didn't need to. Presence was enough. And for once, presence felt permanent. The knock came earlier than expected. Sarah stood in Knox's kitchen, barefoot, hair tied loosely, stirring oatmeal. The morning sun painted soft rectangles on the tile floor. She didn't expect company, not that morning. Knox crossed the living room with his usual unhurried stride. He opened the door, and there she was. Small, brown-skinned, hair in 2 slightly uneven pigtails, backpack sliding off one shoulder. Lenny. Behind her stood an older woman. Gray curls tucked into a bun, keys in hand. She insisted, the woman said with a smile. Said it was time to come home. Knox smiled, warm and private. Thank you, Mom. Lenny slipped inside without ceremony. Daddy. He scooped her up, spinning her once. She squealed with delight. Sarah listened from the kitchen, frozen for a moment. Then she heard it. The tiny voice. Is that pancakes? Knox chuckled. Not this time. Just oatmeal. But with cinnamon. Lenny wiggled down from his arms. She walked straight toward the kitchen without fear. Without caution. That's when she saw Sarah. The little girl stopped. So did Sarah. For half a second, the room stood still. Then Lenny tilted her head. Hi. Sarah crouched slightly. Hi. Are you a grown-up? Sarah smiled. Most days. Lenny stepped closer, eyes wide and unblinking. You're in Daddy's kitchen. I am. Did you sleep here? Knox stepped in then, clearing his throat. Lenny. But Sarah raised a hand gently. It's okay. She looked at Lenny and said, Yes, I did. Lenny didn't flinch. She stepped even closer, until she stood right in front of Sarah, nose wrinkling slightly. "You smell like lavender," she announced. Sarah laughed. "That's my lotion." Lenny leaned in, closer than any adult would dare without permission. Then said, simply, "You smell like home." The words struck deeper than they should have. Sarah blinked. "That's a beautiful thing to say." Lenny shrugged. "I just said what I smelled." From the hallway, Knox leaned against the wall, arms crossed. His eyes were soft, unreadable. Sarah stood slowly. "Well, Miss Lenny," she said, "would you like to help me stir the oatmeal?" Lenny grinned. "I'm good at stirring, but I don't like lumps." "Neither do I." They moved in rhythm. Sarah handed her the wooden spoon. Lenny stirred with a concentration usually reserved for surgery. Sarah watched, amused. Knox never interrupted. He watched them silently, like a man witnessing something he wasn't sure he deserved. After breakfast, Lenny crawled onto the couch and pulled a blanket over her legs. Sarah joined her, not too close but close enough. They watched cartoons. At some point, Lenny's head found Sarah's shoulder. Knox didn't speak. He didn't even move. He just stood at the doorway for a long time, watching, listening, letting something settle. Later, as Sarah helped clear the table, he stepped beside her. "She's not usually that open with people." "She's smart," Sarah said softly. "She sees things." "She does." Their shoulders brushed. He didn't reach for her hand. She didn't ask for his. But something had changed. Not because of the night before, but because of this morning. Because a little girl had declared, without effort, that Sarah didn't feel like a stranger. She smelled like home, and that was the kind of truth you didn't question. Sarah had come over with no intention of staying. She had books in her bag, hair tied up in a puff, and an old college hoodie that clashed with the elegance of Knox's kitchen. But Lenny had greeted her at the door like she'd been gone for months. "Daddy made pancakes," Lenny said, tugging Sarah's hand. "But he burned the first ones again." "Did not," Knox called from the stove. Sarah laughed. "I'll be the judge of that." By the time she reached the kitchen, her bag was on the couch and her shoes were off. Knox handed her a plate without asking if she was hungry. It wasn't planned, but it felt normal. They sat. Lenny in the middle, syrup on her chin, feet swinging. Knox poured coffee into Sarah's mug like he'd done it 1,000 times. She looked at him. "You always make this much?" "Only when I'm trying to impress a 5-year-old critic." Lenny beamed. "He gets extra points if he sings while flipping." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Is that true?" Knox gave a resigned nod. "Unfortunately." Lenny jumped off her seat and bolted to the hallway. A moment later, a small Bluetooth speaker returned in her hands. "Play the pancake song, Daddy." Knox rolled his eyes but smiled. Sarah blinked. "There's a pancake song?" He tapped his phone, and a beat dropped. Upbeat, childlike, with lyrics about flipping syrup and making the perfect stack. Knox didn't sing, but he did hum, barely, quietly, as he cooked the next batch. Sarah laughed. Not out of politeness, out of delight. This wasn't what she imagined when she met him. And yet, this version of Knox felt more complete than anything else she'd seen in a man. Later that afternoon, after cartoons and coloring pages, Lenny napped on the couch. Her little head nestled against Sarah's thigh. A blanket half covered her. Sarah didn't dare move. Knox sat across from them with his laptop, watching the two of them over the screen. "You've been quiet," she said, "not trying to ruin the view." She looked down at Lenny. "She's remarkable. She's everything I'm proud of." Sarah smoothed a hand over Lenny's curls. "You raised her right." Knox hesitated. "Still raising her." Sarah looked at him. "Well, you're doing better than most." He gave a quiet smile. "So are you." She tilted her head. "Me?" He nodded. "Showing up, holding space, giving her softness without trying too hard." Sarah blinked. The compliment caught her off guard. "I didn't even realize I was staying this long," she admitted. I noticed. You didn't say anything. Didn't need to. That night, as Lenny slept soundly in her room, Knox found Sarah curled up on the couch. Laptop. Open, earbuds in. What are you working on? He asked. Grad school applications. He raised a brow. I thought you gave that up. She shrugged. Started again. Slowly. Why? She paused. Because someone keeps playing jazz while feeding me pancakes and making me feel like I'm not too late. Knox didn't speak, just reached into the drawer beside the couch and pulled out a pen. Here, he said, handing it to her. She looked at it. What's this for? For the parts where you still believe in yourself. She held the pen for a long time before smiling. The next morning, she found a printed list of scholarship options taped to the fridge, highlighted, with check boxes. She stared at it, stunned. Knox walked in, coffee in hand. Thought you could use a starting point, he said. Sarah reached for a magnet and pinned her first application underneath it. Neither of them said anything else. But everything had already been said. Sarah hadn't planned to stay the night. She'd stopped by after class to drop off a copy of her essay draft. Knox had offered to proofread it. Lenny was building a blanket fort in the living room. There was chili on the stove. One thing led to another. Now it was nearly midnight, and she stood in Knox's bathroom, brushing her teeth with the spare brush he kept tucked in the drawer beside his. It hadn't been gifted to her. It had simply appeared, one evening, still in the packaging, with a sticky note on the mirror. This one's yours. No rush. She never asked what no rush meant. She just started using it. Now, she rinsed her mouth, patted her face dry, and stepped quietly into the bedroom. Knox was already in bed, shirtless, one arm behind his head, scrolling slowly through something on his phone. He looked up when she entered. All yours. Sarah climbed into bed beside him, the silence easy. She turned on her side, eyes drifting to the dresser across the room. 3 drawers. The middle one had been left slightly open. Was that always open? She asked, nodding toward it. Knox glanced over. No, I left it like that. Why? For you. She blinked. What do you mean? He reached over, turned off the lamp, then settled back. No one ever has to guess if they belong. Not in this house. Sarah sat up a little. Are you saying? I'm not saying anything. Then what's the drawer for? Knox turned his head on the pillow. Whatever you want to leave behind. That silenced her. He wasn't asking her to move in. He wasn't drawing boundaries either. He was making space. Without expectation. Without pressure. Sarah lay back down. The ceiling felt different now. Like it had shifted slightly. They didn't speak for a while. Then Knox said, You don't have to use it. I know. But if one day you realize you keep forgetting your earrings here, or your socks, or your charger, I'd rather you didn't have to ask. Sarah stared into the dark. He wasn't offering a drawer. He was offering room. For her life. For her rhythm. For her mess. She reached for his hand beneath the sheets and held it, fingers lacing with ease. And the next morning, after Knox left early to drop off Lenny at preschool, Sarah got dressed. Slowly. Then walked over to the dresser. Opened the middle drawer. Inside, empty. Except for one thing. A tiny note card at the bottom. Belonging doesn't need an explanation. She laughed, quietly, then reached into her tote and pulled out a soft, folded t-shirt. Her favorite. Faded navy with an old concert logo she hadn't worn in a while. She placed it inside the drawer, then closed it gently. And when she left the house that morning, she didn't say goodbye. She said, See you later. And for the first time in a long time, she meant it. It arrived in a white envelope, thicker than usual, with her name printed in clean block letters. Sarah found it wedged between a water bill and a flyer for discounted yoga classes. She didn't recognize the return address, but the university seal was unmistakable. She opened it standing in Knox's kitchen, one hand still wet from washing blueberries. Her eyes scanned the page, then scanned it again, and again. She didn't breathe until the word congratulations stopped dancing in front of her. She sat down. Hard. Knox entered from the hallway, fresh from his shower, towel around his shoulders, shirt still unbuttoned. You okay? She handed him the letter. He read it silently, then met her eyes. They're offering full tuition? He asked. Plus housing. Plus a small stipend. He nodded. Out of state. 4 states away. The silence pressed in. Not cold, but weighty. Lenny's voice rang out faintly from her room. Something about dinosaurs and glue sticks. Sarah leaned forward, elbows on the counter, hands clasped tightly. I didn't expect it, she said. You earned it. I applied months ago. Before you. Before Lenny. Before this. Knox folded the letter once. Then again. Set it on the counter. You going? Her eyes welled. I don't know. He didn't try to convince her. Didn't talk about long distance. Didn't mention FaceTime or weekend visits. He just pulled out a chair and sat across from her. I want to tell you to stay, he said. But I won't. Tears slipped down her cheek. Because you want me to grow, she whispered. Knox nodded. Because I don't want to be the reason you don't. She covered her face with both hands. He stood, walked around the counter, and wrapped his arms around her from behind. Not tight, not possessive, just there. I've never had this, she said through the fabric of his shirt. Not someone who makes me feel safe and still tells me to fly. You don't belong in a cage, he said, even if it's velvet-lined. Sarah laughed, cracked and broken. You're terrible at metaphors. I'm serious. I know. She pulled back just enough to look up at him. Do you want me to go? He shook his head. But that's not my call. She nodded, wiping her face. You'll take care of her? Knox smiled. She'll take care of me. That night they didn't celebrate. They didn't toast or dance or order takeout. They just sat on the couch, Lenny curled between them, watching a movie none of them really followed. Sarah's hand never left Knox's. And when Lenny finally fell asleep, her tiny body pressed against her father's chest, Sarah kissed the top of her head, then kissed Knox. Longer than usual. Softer. He didn't ask when she was leaving. She didn't say, but the letter sat on the counter. Still folded. Still waiting. The suitcase sat by the door. Half-zipped. Not overpacked. Just enough. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. The decision had been made 2 days ago. The official acceptance email came through that morning. Orientation was in 10 days. She would leave in 3. No one spoke the timeline aloud, but they all felt it. Knox entered the room carrying a folded sweater, hers. He set it on top of her open luggage. Didn't press it down. Didn't rearrange. Just laid it there. She watched him. He didn't meet her eyes. You're quiet, she said. I'm trying not to waste words. She stood slowly, walked to him, wrapped her arms around his waist. He held her back, steady, unshaken. Tell me to stay, she whispered, voice cracking. No. Why not? Knox leaned his forehead against hers. Because if you stayed for me, you'd eventually leave for yourself. Sarah closed her eyes. Her breath caught in her throat. I don't want to leave you. You're not, he said. You're carrying us with you. His voice didn't tremble, but his grip around her tightened. Do you think this will fade? She asked. Knox didn't answer right away. Then, I think it'll change. But I don't think it'll disappear. They stood like that for a long time. No clock ticking. No movie playing in the background. Just skin. And breath. And memories already turning into echoes. That night she didn't sleep on the couch. She didn't offer to. She climbed into his bed, her spot, the left side, just under the window. Knox joined her without hesitation. But when he pulled the covers over them, neither of them reached to remove clothing. They lay side by side, fingers barely touching. No urgency, just wait. I keep thinking, she said, staring at the ceiling, about how we never said what this is. Knox turned his head toward her. Maybe it doesn't need a name. Then what do we call it? He paused. then whispered, "Ours." Sarah rolled to face him. Her nose brushed his. Her eyes, swollen from holding in tears, searched his. "Will you wait?" she asked. "You don't have to ask. I'm afraid. So am I." "Say something stupid," she whispered. "Please, make me laugh." Knox blinked once, then smirked. "Lenny thinks your voice sounds like cartoons. She said you might be a talking bear." Sarah burst into a tearful laugh, then kissed him, just once, and then again longer. Still no clothes removed, still no fire lit, just presence. Their bodies pressed together, fully clothed, fully aware. They held each other until sleep won, and even then, their hands never let go. The apartment felt bigger after she left. Not empty, just quieter. Lenny still danced in the mornings, still demanded stories at bedtime, still asked for two different cereals in one bowl. But sometimes, when she sat coloring at the kitchen island, she'd look up and ask without warning, "When's Miss Sarah coming back?" And Knox would answer the same way every time. "When she's ready." No countdown, no promises, just truth. He didn't mark the days on a calendar, but he knew it had been 3 weeks when her first postcard arrived. A drawing of a city skyline, a short note on the back. "Classes are tough. I miss the jazz in your kitchen." He pinned it to the fridge beside Lenny's finger paintings, then made a playlist titled, "For Her Mornings." He sent it with no caption. She responded 2 days later. "Track 4 made me cry in the library. You're a menace." The texts didn't come daily, but when they did, they mattered. A picture of her desk scattered with highlighters. A blurry shot of Lenny's drawing taped beside her mirror. One-line messages. "Passed my ethics exam. Wish I could share dinner with you tonight. Still using your pen." Knox didn't flood her inbox with responses, but he always replied. "Lenny made pancakes. Her flip game is strong. I saved you the corner of the couch. Still your biggest fan." When the loneliness hit, it didn't come like a wave. Came like a question. One that lingered after Lenny went to bed. One that stared back from her drawer, still half full, untouched. Some nights he'd open it, not to smell her clothes, not to linger, just to remind himself she'd left something behind on purpose. In her absence, he kept going. Work, dad life, Sunday mornings with bad coffee and better memories. He didn't try to move on. He didn't put her on a pedestal either. He just waited, without begging, because this wasn't about holding her back. It was about being strong enough to let her rise, and still leave the light on. One night, after putting Lenny to sleep, he sat in the quiet and stared at his phone. No messages, no updates, but he opened their thread anyway. Typed, deleted, typed again, finally sent. "You still with me?" Her reply came an hour later. "I never left." And with that, he smiled. Airports had a way of making everything feel urgent. Announcements echoed overhead. Luggage wheels clicked along polished floors. People cried, laughed, argued, always moving, always arriving or leaving. But Knox wasn't in motion. He stood still, one arm around Lenny, the other holding a small handmade sign that said, "You already know." She'd insisted on making it. Folded it herself. Used glitter. Knox hadn't argued. Now he stood in arrivals. Black sweater, dark jeans, heart steady, but not calm. It had been 12 months since he last saw her in person. 12 months of one-line texts, random postcards, and half-finished phone calls between time zones and lectures. But today, she was on the other side of those automatic glass doors. Lenny spotted her first. "There!" She pointed, voice rising with joy. And there she was, walking with a carry-on in one hand, sweatshirt tied around her waist, curls bigger, shoulders straighter, stride calmer. Sarah. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She just smiled, the kind that says, "I did what I said I would. And I came home anyway." Lenny squirmed down and bolted forward. Sarah dropped her bag and sank to her knees. Their hug didn't need words. Sarah buried her face in Lenny's neck. Lenny whispered something only She could hear. Knox didn't move, just watched, until Sarah stood. She took a breath, and walked to him slow, sure, steady. They stopped a foot apart. No kiss. No dramatic reunion music. Just two people in recognition. "I'm not the same girl who waited at that restaurant," she said. Knox didn't blink. "Good," he replied. "I was never looking for the same." She looked at him, eyes glossed but unbroken. "You waited. I didn't know how to do anything else." She stepped closer, not rushing, but closing the gap. Knox didn't touch her. He let her speak first. "Can I come back?" "You never left," he said. And then, finally, he opened his arms. She walked into them, and this time, when she breathed him in, she didn't flinch at the weight of it. She just fit. Lenny tugged at their sides. "Can we go home now?" Sarah looked down. "Home?" Knox nodded. "If you want." She smiled, tears slipping quietly. "I do." And they walked out together, three across. No declarations, just a return. The lily was still there. New vase. Same corner booth. Same soft lighting that blurred the edges of sharp memories. Vero's bistro hadn't changed, but Sarah had. She walked in with her chin high, shoulders rolled back. Not in arrogance, just awareness. She didn't need the hostess to tell her where to sit. She already knew. Knox walked beside her, hand gently on the small of her back. Lenny skipped ahead, clutching a pack of colored pencils like they were precious cargo. The hostess smiled. "Back with us again?" Sarah nodded. "Yes, table for 3. They were led to the booth. Same one as before. But this time Sarah didn't sit across from Knox. She slid into the leather bench and he followed right beside her. Lenny hopped up across from them, immediately spreading her coloring tools across the white tablecloth. The server approached with a practiced smile. "Welcome back. Can I start you with anything?" Sarah glanced at Knox. "What did we order the first time?" Knox smiled, remembering. "You didn't." "I did." She turned to the waiter. "We'll have that, whatever that was." The waiter nodded. Right away. As he left, Sarah looked around. The clinking glasses, the ambient hum of conversation, the low, steady jazz in the background. It used to overwhelm her. Now it just filled the room. Lenny began to draw, 2 stick figures holding a smaller stick figure's hand. Underneath it, she wrote in blocky print, "US." Sarah leaned over. "Is that us?" she asked. Lenny nodded. "You have big hair. Daddy has big shoes, and I have big crayons." Sarah laughed. "Fair." Knox placed his arm across the back of the booth, his fingers brushing the top of her shoulder. He didn't need to pull her close. She was already there. They didn't say much, didn't rehash the year apart, didn't relive the night she left or the days they texted from across states. They just ordered food, passed bread, helped Lenny reach the butter dish. And when the meal arrived, steaming with lemon, herbs, and a touch of memory, they ate. Slowly. No performance. Just peace. After the plates were cleared and Lenny returned to her drawings, Knox raised his glass. "Water, not wine." He looked at Sarah. "To the girl who waited and still believed," he said. She met his gaze. "And to the man who showed up," she replied. Lenny looked up. "Can I toast too?" They smiled. "Of course." She raised her cup of apple juice. "To pancakes, and hugs, and the drawer with the shirt still in it." Knox nearly choked on his sip. Sarah laughed, full and free. And somewhere in the corner of the restaurant, a pianist shifted to a new key. Softer, brighter. They didn't notice. But something in the room knew. A full circle had closed. The door clicked shut behind them. Lenny was asleep at her grandmother's for the night. Knox's only request when Sarah said she was ready. There was no wine, no music, no pretense. Just a lamp in the corner casting a warm halo over the living room rug. Her heels were already off. His jacket hung over the back of the chair. Sarah turned to face him. They hadn't spoken since leaving the restaurant. They didn't need to. She stepped forward first, unfastened the top button of her dress, slid the zipper down herself. It slipped from her shoulders like a decision already made. She wore red, just like the first time she thought she had something to prove. But now she didn't need permission to belong. Knox didn't rush. He stepped closer, one hand at the small of her back, the other tracing her cheek with the pad of his thumb. "You're sure?" he asked. Sarah nodded once. "I'm here, aren't I?" His mouth met hers, slow, certain. Not hungry, not hesitant, just known. She undid the buttons of his shirt one by one. Her fingers didn't tremble this time. They remembered him, just as he remembered every curve of her body. They moved together with no nervous laughter, no awkward pauses. They had already laughed, already wept, already waited. Now they simply confirmed. Knox lifted her gently, her legs around his waist, her breath in his ear. He carried her not to impress, but to honor. To the bedroom, to the same bed. But tonight it wasn't just familiar. It was home. He laid her down, crawled over her, kissed her collarbone, her sternum, the underside of her breast, her hip. Every kiss said the same thing. You stayed, even when you left. She arched beneath him, not to invite, but to welcome, to tell him, "This is yours, not my body, but my trust." When he entered her, she didn't gasp. She exhaled, a full-bodied release like a woman no longer bracing for hurt. Their bodies moved with rhythm. No frantic thrusts, just a slow deepening, like waves, like memory. She rode him after, chest to chest, forehead resting against his. Her name on his lips wasn't a moan. It was a prayer. When she climaxed, she didn't scream. She clutched, tight, close, still, as if trying to hold the moment between her hands so it wouldn't slip. Knox flipped her gently, cradled her hips, kissed the curve of her spine. She turned her head to look at him. He didn't smile. He watched her, like art, like evidence, like proof that love is patient. When they finished, they didn't speak. Their breathing slowed. She curled into him, skin to skin. He pulled the blanket over them both, his hand on her thigh, her fingers drawing circles on his chest. After a long stretch of silence, she whispered, "Knox." His voice was low, already laced with sleep. You were never the stranger at the next table." He kissed her hair. "And you were never waiting alone." If this story reminded you that love isn't about chasing, it's about showing up, then we invite you to do the same. Comment below. I believe in slow, steady love. Tap that like button to help this reach someone who needs it. Subscribe to Mr. Hearthline Stories for more stories.